Fearless. Provocative.
Straight talking.
We pledge to say it like it really is.
With dignity and respect.
Committed to free speech and common sense.
Upbeat and entertaining.
Straight talking and direct.
We may agitate each other and you.
Heartfelt and passionate.
Thought-provoking, provocative and controversial.
Fearless and truthful.
Hello and welcome to The Pledge. So, Hillary's now decided to completely ignore Donald. She says after debating him for 4.5 hours, she's simply not going to respond to him anymore. That's a thought. On the show this week, Michelle wants to talk about a subject that's incredibly close to my heart. June will argue that Barack Obama is right up there with Abraham Lincoln. I'm pretty sure that Greg's going to accuse me of being a NIMBY. And Nick doesn't want J.K. Rowling interfering in his noble calling. But first, Struth. According to new guidelines from Universities UK, students have to ask for consent before they kiss or initiate sexual contact, or risk being sanctioned or suspended if they don't. I'm outraged. This is the kiss of death to good old boy meets girl. Just imagine this scene from the film of One Day. 2 students up in Edinburgh, those heady varsity days.
My parents' number. And their address, just in case.
Right.
Oh, Dad's got a fax machine at work.
Just a phone number's fine. Oh, thank you.
It's ridiculous. Universities are there to educate, not lay on compulsory consent seminars and be safe spaces for snowflakes. Look, I don't approve of young women or men being pressured into doing anything they don't want to do, or males aggressing females, ever. But administrative bureaucracies should butt out of students' private lives and allow female students to take responsibility for themselves. They're adults. And all this stuff around kissing and consent is creating a wedge between the sexes and a generation of bourgeois crybabies.
Bourgeois crybabies, Rachel. I love it, but I completely disagree. I don't understand your problem with this. How can it be a bad thing to not make it clear what's acceptable and unacceptable behaviour? Especially when, with this stuff, it's such a grey area. And a lot of young girls don't necessarily have the confidence to say no when they mean no. I think if boys know this is what's acceptable and this is what isn't, everyone knows where they stand, no?
Well, I think that's a very fair and rational reaction to what's happened, but I don't think you maybe have looked at the exact guidelines that the Universities UK have put out, which I just think are astonishing and rather old-fashioned.
Okay.
In relation to the unacceptable behaviour of kissing without consent, the act of forcefully kissing another on the lips is likely to be regarded as a serious disciplinary offence, whereas the act of lightly kissing another on the back of a hand is likely to be regarded as a less serious disciplinary offence.
Is this real?
This is what I'm telling you, June. Why are universities spending time and money and effort codifying these early, very gentle sexual contacts between students? Obviously, anything that's done with force is abhorrent.
Yeah.
But this is ridiculous, and we should ignore it.
So are you worried about teenage boys not finding ways to get laid? Because I can assure you, or get it on, shall I say, I can assure you, it doesn't matter what the guidelines are, that they will find a way to do it. So I don't think we need to be worried that it's going to somehow prevent young boys feling confident enough to approach girls.
I think it actually will.
Do you think so?
I think it actually will. I think that now, in this climate, I think men, boys, young men, are so terrified that they're going to be slapped down or expelled from their place of learning that they aren't going to be normal. They're not going to be natural in the way that we saw in that clip from One Day. What about you, Greg?
Your clip from One Day, I assume you haven't seen the film.
I've read the book.
Yes. Well, you know they'd already had sex, those two, long before. That's how this thing opened. And the kiss is at the end of spending the night and a day together. So I'm not sure it's exactly the most appropriate.
Story of my life. It's the story of my life.
Yeah, but yours was without the sex.
Rachel. They will always find a way. If there's an opening, They will find a way. So the way I see it is it doesn't hurt for everybody to know where they stand and clarify what's acceptable and unacceptable behaviour.
June, a very wise old judge once said to me that there is no point having laws that are unenforceable, and this is unenforceable. How are you ever actually going? And the kids will just ignore it. It makes the law a laughing stock. Just lastly, I broke down, as Rachel read, forcefully kissing as a serious disciplinary offence. Well, presumably if they're in a relationship, they're allowed to do it, are they? This has just got holes the size of the Channel Tunnel that you can drive through.
Yeah, but isn't... I mean, I knew you were going to talk about this today, so I made a couple of phone calls back to my...
Kids?
To university. And I said, how big an issue is this? And basically they said, there's no spike in... Suddenly that there's more complaints about inappropriate behaviour and the rest of it. What is happening is, in quite a lot of universities, I discovered, the Students' Union are actually organising seminars and organising meetings for people coming to Freshers' Week and things like that to say, look, some things are inappropriate. Now, that seems to me perfectly valid.
If it comes from the students, I think it is.
I do.
But when Nick said that this is unenforceable, I don't know whether this is completely relevant, but don't forget, Julian Assange is in the Ecuadorian embassy because he failed to ask consent of a woman he'd already been to bed with, and now he's...
Well, that's
a perpetual prisoner.
We must say, of course, that he would protest his innocence.
He would protest, yes. I haven't said what... You know, because this is a big thing in Sweden, where this has grown from something as it were, superficial as asking someone permission to kiss, can then escalate in the law, and people can end up, you know, banged up.
But isn't this, for me, so I sit there and when you say this and you read that on the screen, it sounds ridiculous, but then when you step back from it and you look at some stats around it, to me this is universities trying to cover their backsides, because when you actually look at some of these stats, something like 68% of students, university students, are saying that they've experienced sexual harassment, 17% of them are saying they've experienced unwanted kissing. So when you have those kind of stats going on, you have to do something. It doesn't matter if because I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I read that and I go, what are you talking about? But as a professional institution, they have to try and somehow protect their backside. And to me, that's what that is.
Will this make any difference? Do you honestly think this would
make
a difference?
No, I don't.
As Greg says, there's no real big sudden spike in it. And as Rachel and I seem to agree, but people are just... And you say, if they want to get it on, to use a more polite expression, Ms. Sarpong, instead of your potty mouth, if they want to get it on, they'll get it on anyway.
What does seem to have happened over the years is that Freshers' Week has become more and more... debauched and an alcoholic...
it's carnage.
Carnage, as you say. I think that's a good description, carnage. And there is, therefore, an argument for the Students' Union, to say, look... Just being responsible.
Completely. And
particularly to the guy.
I agree. And also, you know, 73% of students actually agree with this. So this isn't something that's being forced on them.
Well, hang on.
Hold on, how
what
could
student
they?
is going to say no?
Like...
Come on, if I was asked that question, I'd say, no, I think I should be able to wander up to any woman and forcefully kiss. No student is going to say, yes, I want that. No, let's be silly.
All I'm saying is, at the end of the day, when it comes to cases of sexual assault, a lot of the time, women... and men, the women are not sure, they're not confident enough to truly know whether or not something has happened. A lot of the times when girls have experienced something that feels uncomfortable, they're not sure if it was actually sexual assault. And what I'm saying is if there are clear guidelines in terms of what's acceptable and unacceptable behaviour, if something happens that is within this area, we all know where we stand. So I think actually in this day and age we do need guidelines. And that is why so many women resonated with Michelle Obama's speech, because I think all women have experienced something that is a little bit uncomfortable, which is why everything that's happening with Donald Trump, women have just got behind and said, no, we're not standing for this, because we've all been there in some way, shape or form.
But the other argument that was made to me yesterday is, look, we're talking about here kids of 18, 19, 20. Actually, you've got to start earlier than that. If you're actually going to have a sort of an education saying, of explaining to people what is inappropriate, you've got to do it long before they're 17, 18, 19. You've got to start younger in the schools.
But you start with parenting. Surely, if you're bringing up kids,
you should be teaching them
what's appropriate and what's not appropriate.
Can't always guarantee the parents are going to do the job.
Yeah, you're putting too much trust in. I mean, of course you're right, but so many kids, unfortunately, don't benefit from sometimes two parents, let alone one parent who's got any interest.
Well, did you ever have that discussion with you got two sons, did you have that discussion with them?
No, not really, because... no, I never sat down and talked about how you need to be respectful of women, because I just hoped that they'd seen me around them. So, should I have done? Maybe I should. No, I didn't, and I don't think parents, certainly with your sons, I don't think you sit down and say...
You wouldn't try and teach your... Like, because I don't have children, but I imagine when I do my very best to bring my children up to be, boys respectful of women,
but you set,
chivalrous...
for example, you're respectful around but in my case, your ex-wife, my mum, her sister, you're always respectful around women. I think you teach by example more than, right, sit down, because today's sons, we're going to talk about why you mustn't force yourself on women. But
I think there is a difference between that and when you turn up and you get... You're almost encouraged to get drunk for a week
exactly.
when you turn up at Freshers Weekend. And I can understand why they're for the students, not the administration.
Yes.
The students should be organising and saying, look, just behave yourself.
Yeah, and let's know what's acceptable and unacceptable.
But what I find regrettable about this and sad is that universities are supposed to be a place where you go and you...
Experiment.
You grow up. And I think if the universities are taking this sort of... not professorial role, this sort of moral high tone with students about their behaviour, it doesn't allow them to become adults in a way that I think that's what university is there for. I think what Greg said was really important, which is that if this comes from the students, it's fine. But if it's being imposed on the student body as a sort of new set of guidelines, which are, I hope we all agree, ridiculous.
I agree.
Yeah, they are.
Can I kiss the back of your hand, Nick? Thank you.
I slightly misheard you. Kiss. I wonder what she said
Thank you so much.
Very nice, very nice. Right, from kissing to the kiss of life. That's what I want to talk about in some regards. Because when I was school age, one of my friends died. We watched him suffer for many years from cystic fibrosis because a lung donor couldn't be found. I do think about him often, and I wonder about the kind of guy he would have grown up to be. But every day across the UK, around 3 people who could have benefited from a transplant die because there are not enough organ donors. Currently, around 6,500 people, including children, are on the waiting list for a transplant. And for years, we've had an opt-in donor system where we would proactively register our willingness to share our organs when we die. But we're not coming close enough to helping the people in need. We need to introduce presumed donation, where all of us will be automatically registered as donors unless we choose to opt out. After all, what greater gift can one give than the gift of life, especially when we've sadly lost our own?
The problem, and in principle you're right, but the problem is, where does the individual's freedom start and where does the society's freedom start? And where can the individual not say, actually, I don't want this? And you're saying, yeah, they could say that, but if they've not said anything at all, they can have... their organs can be used.
Yes. Exactly
you'd have to be very clear, it seems to me, if that's true, you'd have to be very clear that this would lead, because it is a loss of freedom for the individual, but you'd have to be very clear that this would lead to more organs being available. And there was I don't know if you've read this, there was the Organ Donation Task Force about 10 years ago came out with a report on this, which said the evidence wasn't clear that this would actually lead to more organs being available. And that actually what it might lead to is more organs being available to people from people who die, but actually fewer people will give organs during their lifetime. Now, I've got 2 very close friends who've both had organ transplants, one from someone who died and one from a member of the family. In both cases, I mean, it's pretty serious stuff, this. But I'm not sure I want this. I suppose I've become a sort of left-of-centre libertarian as I've got old. There's a bit of me that says I don't want the state making these decisions for me.
If you were waiting for a donor organ and you would die unless somebody provided you a donor organ, I think you'd change your mind.
You might do, but then it's not necessarily a rational decision.
But can I just counter to your points, because then I'm really keen on your experience as well, Rachel. So what I would say to you is you quoted a study that was almost 10 years ago that said it wouldn't have a difference, but actually in Wales they've introduced a version of this, and in the first 6 months 60 transplants happened, 32 of which were from this deemed consent. So that's my first point. My second point is I'm not talking about anyone losing any freedoms of anything, because number one, you will automatically be enrolled, but crucially, you will have the opportunity to express your choice. If you do not want to be on there, you can remove yourself.
Yeah.
And also, the family would have to give the final consent before it happens.
But you've still got a position where if I say nothing, my organs can then be used.
Yes, that's what I want.
That is a change in the position, and you'd have to be very clear that would have a dramatic effect. Now,
I hope so.
This commission, actually, to be fair to them, said, look, at some stage you should come back and look at this again and look at the evidence again. They didn't think there was the evidence then, but maybe there is the evidence. But I as I say, as a libertarian, I don't want states deciding those things for me. I'd rather decide them myself.
This is going to be quite a rare pledge moment, because I'm only going to make one contribution because I feel this so keenly. Our doctors are always making the decisions for what they seem to be the right reasons. Yes, of course they are. Do they get it wrong? Yes, they do. On May the 11th, 1968, my late brother, Simon, was 17 when he was on his way back from seeing a play for school studies. He was, there's a picture of him up now, he was a rear seat passenger and he was catapulted headfirst into a lamppost in Camberwell. He was unconscious from May the 11th till August the 31st. On arrival at the hospital, the doctor said to my mum and dad, your son is dead, we need his organs. I can't tell you how my mother reacted. Apparently I wasn't there, I subsequently heard. Then, and there's some rather nasty language here, they said to my parents, well, he'll have no quality of life, he'll be a vegetable. They used to use those expressions in the late 60s. He'll be disabled, he'll spend a whole life in a wheelchair. My parents said, whatever it is, we're keeping him. He went on, he was unconscious, he went on to have 34 years of life, and he was a reporter on the Daily Mirror.
Wow.
I'm sure the doctors were saying it for the right reasons. They can get it wrong. My only concern, and now I'll close, thank you, is that in some instances, Simon lived, others will not.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
Wow. I understand. I think that's an awful situation. It doesn't change my view. I think that's awful for you and your family, but I still think I stand by that. Of course, there will be situations where we get it wrong. You've got to have safeguards. So first and foremost, you've got to allow people to opt out of this system. And secondly, you've got to allow the family to have that ultimate authorisation point.
Yeah.
And hopefully you've got those
they would
two
actually have to be clinically dead, wouldn't they?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, of course.
In your case, he wasn't, was he?
He wasn't, but all the medical advice was...
That he would be.
He's dead, yeah, he's effectively dead,
horrible.
and he will have no quality of life. And fortunately, they found a brain surgeon, Mr McCabe, it's in the family history, who worked through the night and put my brother back together.
Amazing.
Bless him.
My breaths are really taken away by that story.
Yeah.
I tell it on the radio quite... That's why I respect people. And by the way, if I wanted a heart, of course I'd want someone... And I respect people who do it, but I will never be able to donate my... Because that is so... I was 9 at the time. That is so steeped into my upbringing. Because I didn't see my parents for months because they just lived at the hospital.
But if they had taken a decision, I mean, push a bit further, if they had taken... If you were dead, and it was absolutely clear-cut, you would not want your...
if I was dead, absolutely dead.
Yeah. The problem is this thing called elective ventilation, where they say somebody's brainstem is dead, and then you're ventilated because the organs need a supply of blood and oxygen in order then to be good for somebody else.
Oh.
But, I mean, my husband had a liver transplant and would have died without one, and I remember being so anxious about... there's 6,000 people were like him waiting for a donor organ, and 1,000 people a year die for want of donor organs. And we have completely different views on this. He's like Nick. He doesn't think that the human body is a sort of assembly of quick-fit parts and doctors should be able to take one and plug it in another. Because he thinks, like Greg, that, you have personal autonomy and the state shouldn't have any jurisdiction whatsoever or call on your body before or after death. I actually disagree, and I'm with Michelle on this. I'm keen on the presumed consent system, because if you really mind about what happens to your body after death, you opt out, Greg. You don't just let the whole thing slide and then leave it for your family to decide. And this is the big problem, which is that 4 out of 10 families say no, even when the person is on the donor register and they know their wishes. Because it's like your traumatic bedside scene, which is... it's the worst possible time to ask the bereaved family whether they can remove the loved one's organs when they want to grieve. And so it's the terrible system. You need to have it organised separately from the deathbed.
4 in 10 families are actually saying, no, you can't take these organs. And that's why it's so important, and it's very morbid, but it's so important to have these conversations about your wishes.
OK, to move on to a happier topic, it finally looks like London's Heathrow Airport might get a 3rd runway. Now, there are bound to be protests, but does anyone outside of West London actually care? Well, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson cares. Remember, in his old job as Mayor of London, he said he'd lie in front of a bulldozer rather than let the runway be built. Now he's got a bigger job, he might just forget that promise. What the story of the 3rd runway actually shows is just how hard it is to build any large infrastructure project in modern Britain. I was a reporter on a local paper in West London back in the 60s, and airport capacity for London was a big issue then. Since then, we've had all sorts of commissions, reports and recommendations, but very little has actually happened. Even though Parliament and the government now want it and know it's needed, I still have real doubts whether the new runway at Heathrow will actually ever be built. Building projects are not a problem in Beijing, Shanghai or Hong Kong. Someone just says, do it. But in advanced democracies today, I'm afraid the not in my backyard brigade usually win.
Greg, as somebody who will be suffering sleepless nights from overflights, I really hope you're right. And that
Are you talking about you or me?
Me, and you're in Richmond, I'm in Notting Hill, I can't remember where you are.
Blackheath.
OK, well, there's going to be many,
Nowhere near it.
many more flights if this happens. But what you're saying is, it's not going to happen. We're not like China. We never build things because we have judicial commissions and we have NIMBY protests and we kick infrastructure into the long grass when we should be building things. Well, I mean, look at what happens in China when they build things against the wishes of residents.
More and more people are filming what's happening to them. Here, neighbours secretly record the moment police drag an old man from his home. Minutes later, demolition teams move in to tear down their house for development.
Yes, I mean, I think if Boris lay down in front of one of those diggers, they would absolutely
There wouldn't be much
him.
left of him, would there? No, I don't think. I'd like to see him in the scoop, though.
On Heathrow, I feel really strongly this is a disastrous decision. It was always the wrong airport in the wrong place.
Where should it have been, Rach?
Gatwick.
So it's all right,
it's all right
for the people of Crawley, it's all right for the people of Horsham.
You know and I know, and Greg is going to tell us that Heathrow is only there in 1946.
It shouldn't have been there at all.
It shouldn't have been there at all, and now we're expanding it.
It is there. It is there. So let's just expand
it's going to destroy
it.
swathes of London.
No, but this is...
pollution
it's going to
and
produce
noise.
thousands of jobs, Rachel.
I don't care
at a
about
time
thousands
when we
of jobs.
Well, you should.
How many million
to.
people in London are going to have their lives blighted by this?
But look at even recent years. Look at the Labour government. The last Labour government decided to do this.
Yeah.
The Conservatives came out against it, and the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats have always been against it.
Yeah.
The Conservatives came out against it largely because there were a few marginal seats that they might win, right? One of which, of course, your brother's got now is Uxbridge. And then you roll forward. Now, on getting into government, perhaps to their surprise, the Conservatives suddenly realised, actually, there was a problem about airport capacity in the London area.
Yep.
Now they're going to support this, and even Theresa May is going to support it. And I mean, she's the MP for Maidenhead, which flies right across.
Yours is solely a NIMBY argument because you're quite happy for the people of West Sussex to be blighted by noise and air pollution and traffic delays and goodness knows what.
Hold on,
but you don't want your mansion in a very affluent part of West London.
There isn't
more
a city the size of London adjacent to Gatwick.
Her case is compelling. Jobs
77,000 jobs,
and
Rachel.
the nation will fall by.
Yeah,
We're already.
lost me, love.
Heathrow is no longer the busiest airport in the world. That's Dubai. If it's not careful, it won't be the busiest airport in Middlesex.
Yeah. Why do you want the busiest airport in the world?
Well, what's called commerce and business and keeping this country...
Yeah.
And also, without getting June mad...
20% of flights only are
post-Brexit decision...
20% of flights only out of Heathrow are business flights. The rest are tourists.
We're not allowed a holiday?
And they add to our economy.
But when I have this argument with people in Richmond, and I'm not vehemently in favour of doing it, I'm just saying I don't think it'll happen. But when I have this argument, I say to them, Jimmy, were you born here? And they all, no, they all came. They all moved in.
Yeah.
And I say, well, hang on. Didn't you know there was an airport up the road? And didn't you know that it was likely to be expanded? And it really is NIMBYism.
It is.
And you've really got to say, in the end, what is in the long-term
Noise and air
interest?
pollution
Yeah,
over millions of people is not
Over
NIMBY.
77,000 jobs and 5,000 apprentices.
We hardly come in here every
Rachel.
week where you haven't flown somewhere. Right?
Mainly private.
Yes, mainly private.
Mainly private.
Yes, you're one of those people.
Yeah, out of Northolt.
There's hardly a week where you haven't flown somewhere, in which case...
Lucky you live round the corner.
Is it just for you, or is it... You know, that seems to me the problem. We all want more access, we all want to fly places, we all want holidays, we all have to go there on business, and yet we're arguing at the same time there shouldn't be more airport capacity.
And you know what you're buying into when you move to that area. My sister lives right near the airport. Sorry, I have no pity. You live there, that's what you get.
That's right.
I live next to the train station. I can't
You're all
complain.
mad. Do you realise that they're going to build this runway over the M25?
No, I mean, that is extraordinary.
Are you all on the living planet as I am? I'm mad.
You mustn't pick up every strange little story that comes out.
By Chris Grayling, the Transport Secretary.
Well, building over it or under it.
My take on it is very clear. Will people be disrupted by any airport expansion? Of course they will. And will it be deeply unpleasant for all of those people affected? Yes, it will. I live on the flight path. It's a right pain in the backside, and it will get worse. It's not my dream, but it's something that, you know, I have to accept probably will happen. I think that what you just seen in China then, my nana was forced out of her house. I did a CPO and a compulsory purchase order on my nana's house, and it was terrible. My granddad died in the street outside. My nana never even moved his jacket or his tobacco pouch or anything. She'd lived in that house, had all of her family. This purchase order was horrendous for the whole family. We thought it would kill her having to leave her home. It was awful. But she did, and life moved on. And what I think is we're in a situation, especially now that we're leaving the EU, we need to make sure that we are highly competitive within business, for example, and we need to trade as a globalised nation. So actually, when we talk about business flights, it's not just how many people are going for business flights, business meetings abroad, it's how we're exporting cargo often. So we need more air capacity. I think the shame in all of this is the fact that this has dragged on and on for decades.
Previous governments have all set their faces against it because it's crazy.
No, the Labour government didn't.
In 2003, Tony Blair okayed it.
Okay,
2003.
the government okayed it, and they knew it was a problem. And the Conservatives,
no ifs, no buts.
For short-term political advantage, decided that they would put it in their manifesto that they oppose it. Now they've changed their position.
Because they know
it's needed.
It's needed.
Now,
it's needed for tourism. You talk about business and Brexit.
Go on holiday.
No, I'm not saying this, but you're talking about business and Brexit as if this is what Heathrow's expansion is going to do. Stansted has got tons of spare capacity. Make it in Stansted.
Rachel, I am bringing this debate in on runway 29 because I'm up next and I have a few things to say about the Fourth Estate. And I don't mean your country house, Rachel. I've no doubt that viewers and the panel will remember these newspaper splashes. Drugs administered by the state that caused hideous birth defects. MPs caught claiming expenses to spend on anything from floating duck houses to bath plugs. Cheating Pakistani cricketers guilty of spot fixing in a test match in exchange for a bung. A tiny, and I mean absolutely minuscule taste of some of the great stories brought to you by the British press. Truly the best on the planet. This week, the government stopped perilously short of imposing a law that would have forced newspapers to pay all the legal costs of anyone suing them, even if the paper won the case. That's the equivalent of being cleared of a crime, but still doing the time. But conferring official approval on Impress as a press regulator, a body with precious few members, smacks of state regulation of the press. Laws are already, and quite rightly, in place for matters such as libel. And the majority of sane publishers have signed up to the powerful, independent monitoring body IPSO. We don't need Impress, backed by the wealthy former Formula One bigwig, Max Mosley. Is our press at times raucous and rowdy? Undeniably. Should it, however, be free of the state? Undoubtedly.
So, Nick, you referenced the press being raucous and rowdy. Let me very briefly explain some of my personal experience of said tabloid press. I went on to a reality TV show 10 years ago now, time flies. What happened to me off the back of that TV show, oh my God. To say it ruined my life is an exaggeration. Obviously it didn't, I'm still here. But the pain and devastation and misery the tabloids caused to me and to my family was second to none. I had quite a colourful background. I was just a normal person. I went on what I thought was a business show. It was BBC Two, wasn't looking to be a celebrity or famous. When I was on that show, I had reporters outside of my house every day, every night. I was followed by tabloid reporters in cars. It scared me. I used to ring whoever, like my mum or whoever, and say, look, I'm being followed by this car, this is the reg, this is the thing. I got pregnant. I was in a fairly new relationship and I was pregnant. It ended up being front page news of a tabloid newspaper. There it is. Before I even had made my own decisions about what the pregnancy meant to me and to my relationship, it was all over the press. I had an uncle, the tabloid papers found him, was offering 10, 20, 30 quid for stories. I had a front page story on the News of the World. The headline was My Killer Dad. They were offering my nana, they were following my nana, offering my nana money. And the biggest point for me was, to this day, I struggle with trust because I have no idea who was selling me out. Somebody in my inner circle of friends or family was selling me out. I can't find out who it is. I've tried. The newspapers were literally every day, every week, printing deeply personal stories of me, and it really upsets me. How I lost my virginity was a double-page spread in a newspaper. Now, I don't know, I don't even find that interesting. Why is it even in a paper?
And I'm not going to seek to defend the indefensible, because all of that is indefensible. But I would tell you now, none of that, very little of what you've just said would be allowed to be run in the post-Leveson world, because it cannot be deemed to be in the public interest. Sadly, Michelle, does it interest the public? Yes, it does. Is it in the public interest that you lost? No, it's not. So very few papers would run that. We are in a different world. We have a much tougher regulator. And by the way, it's right. That it was appalling what you suffered, absolutely appalling. Ipso is tough, and I mean, I've got to know you quite well through the months that we've been doing this, and actually you and I often agree on many things. I can't... not putting you hideous that you've been through. You can't want the state involved in regulating the newspapers.
No, so I want regulation from somebody. I don't care if it's a state or something. I don't want newspapers to find my 80-odd-year-old nana, as she was then, followed around, and I don't want people sitting on my wall following me and stuff like that. It's horrible. And let me tell you, I had to dye my hair black so that I wasn't recognised. I never even really went out the house. I had to unconnect my doorbell. I had to close my blinds.
And let me put this very clear. One of the biggest names on television, one of his or her parents is suffering an extreme medical condition that every newspaper in the land knows about. I know about it. The papers will never, ever... And it would be page 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. I'm telling you, and it's terrible what you went through. We're in a different world. It would never happen.
But you say you're in a different world, which you are to an extent, but you've got a regulator that still isn't independent.
No.
Because it... And whether you...
Do you mean Ipso?
Yes.
In what way not independent?
Well, it's still it's set up... It's self-regulation.
Yeah,
but
that's not good enough.
I mean, the trouble with your argument about the state is that broadcasters in this country have always lived with Ofcom or its equivalent before that, the Radio Authority, the Television Authority. It's always lived with that. Has it stopped them doing stories that are massively in the public interest? No. But what it has meant is they can't do some of the sordid things that a lot of popular press used to do.
Would you allow them?
And I'm one of these people. I've had people reporters standing outside my door. They never found out I got another way out. They
have now, by the way. Hold on a second.
No, I moved. No, but I've had them standing out saying, "Oh, have you got blood on your hands, Mr. Dyke?" Now, I was running a big television company. I was an adult. I can cope with that. If you're like she was,
no, I know. Hang on,
you get savage. But you see, you can't escape from the fact that those things happened to many,
and it affects my life
really another era. It was pre-Leveson. And I work for a tabloid as well, Greg, and I sometimes said things, and my editor would say, "There's no way we're going to run that." They are running scared of having a second Leveson inquiry, which is still up in the air.
Well, what, £5 million quid for what? 5 million quid for what? So
I know, banged
nothing.
up 5 million quid just to tell us that there are a few phones hacked on the tabloids.
Which there are laws in place.
They probably
anyway.
hacked your friend. Anyway, they could have been hacking your phone, Michelle, if you're wondering who leaked your stories.
But the trouble is, all journalists...
They wasn't, by the way.
All journalists who were disproportionately or have worked for the tabloids make this argument. They're all making... Actually, what have they got to be scared of having an independent regulator?
Yeah, what have they got to be scared of?
If what you're saying is right, because I'm not sure it is.
It is right.
And if you look at what's
Nick and I
happened
work for tabloids, we know what we're talking about. You cannot run these stories anymore.
Well, if you look at Fatima Manji, who I know very well, I think with
you explain who she is. Jim.
Yeah, Channel 4 news presenter.
Oh, right, okay.
Of course, your friend Calvin Mackenzie said...
Who presented the news in a hijab.
In a hijab, and Calvin said that she shouldn't be reporting on the Nice attacks because she was overtly Muslim. And for them to completely say that there was nothing wrong in his reporting... How is that
He was expressing an opinion.
No, we're allowed
this is what columnists do.
No, but...
No, I'm sorry, we are allowed opinions.
No, the problem here is if that decision had come from an totally independent regulator and said exactly
Alan
the same
Moses
thing,
is
that would have been
independent,
fine.
Greg. So Alan Moses is independent.
The press funds it.
It's partly funded by the press, yes.
And they regulate it themselves.
Here's the danger
There's
of
no way that is good enough,
Impress,
Nick.
which is funded by Max Mosley, J.K. Rowling and others. The danger with Impress was, now this was stopped, that unless you agreed to the system...
Yeah, and that was crazy.
Yeah, they would, if you take a case and I actually win, I still pay your costs.
Yeah,
well, that is vexatious, written all over it. And let's just look at who signed up to Impress, shall we? So far, they've got the New Internationalist, the Scottish website Ferret and the Carefully Observer, right?
Ferret,
yes, absolutely.
Well, the whole point is
Ipso has got the Mirror, the Sun and Times, the Telegraph...
They're governing themselves. Of course they'd all sign up.
The one thing
to
you know
that.
about almost every area of self-regulation is that it doesn't work. Whether you look at the doctors, you look at anybody, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't look at the lawyers. And the problem is, you might have the best...
Football?
The best... No, football doesn't. But you might have a really good independent regulator, but because of the way it's set up, it doesn't have the credibility.
But it's not fair.
What is your fear of a totally independent regulator? What is your fear?
It's not independent.
Impress is not independent.
Impress.
No, I'm not talking about Impress.
No,
I'm talking about what is your
fear?
But what is your... Only because of where they've got to. What is your fear of having an equivalent of Ofcom?
Exactly.
I think the Ofcom comparison is unfair because because I think, Greg, and you've worked in newsrooms for telly and for newspapers, I think you'd agree newspapers normally set the day's agenda, notwithstanding great work done by Panorama and other shows. By and large, it's the papers that break the thalidomides, the Daily Telegraph with all the cheating MPs,
They could still do that with an independent regulator.
No, because
what they couldn't do
they would spend their entire time.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, we could sit down and compare which stories came from broadcasters and which stories came from newspapers.
You might win. 90% come from originated by newspaper journalism.
No, that's not true.
That is true.
No, but Rachel, they could still do that with an independent regulator.
The whole time in front
they
of
could still do that.
No, they wouldn't.
Thank God.
So you don't know. They don't spend your time in front of Ofcom. The number of times I ever spent in front of in the years I was in television, spent in front of a regulator was virtually nil in terms of individual stories. But it does mean there is somebody who has some credibility of the public deciding upon whether or not you did it properly.
Exactly.
And that's what the newspapers need, because you're always going to be seen...
What do you want, Nick? What are you saying?
He wants what they've got.
They want
press freedom, Michelle.
So are you saying that IPSO is fit for purpose and we don't need anything else?
I think it's certainly worth giving it a try, yes. I have far more confidence in IPSO, which is ferociously independent, with a hugely respected judge as its chair, Sir Alan Moses.
So let me
but you can't want the state controlling the
but
board that appoints the board.
Because I don't fully understand.
Okay.
If you're telling me it's independent, but then it's partly funded by the people it's supposed to govern, help me understand, how is that independent?
In the same way as the doctors, I will admit, and it's not perfect, the doctors have their own tribunal body as well. I think it's at least worth trying.
I'm talking about IPSO. Is it independent? You just told me it is,
well,
but then you're telling me it's
press
not.
standards of
It's got
organisation, so yes.
Is it independent?
Yes, it's independent.
No, we want people who have nothing to do with the press. That's who we want.
Oh, my God. You want people who don't know how the press works.
But no, a lot of people retired these days, and many more than they used to be, because the press is in some financial difficulty. There are lots of people who could sit on there, but they can't be sitting on there at the same time as they're in
writing.
Hold on. Judges have been, solicitors have been, barristers have been, lawyers.
Anyway,
you don't go and get a milkman and make him a judge.
Nick, sorry,
he hasn't got the Latin.
You've lost us on this one.
Well,
No, I'm totally on it.
Yeah, but you two are both a vested interest.
Exactly.
You almost
No,
don't
we
matter.
need a free press. We need to support it, not fine it.
Here.
We need to also regulate it. That's what we need to do. Anyway, it's my turn next, and I will be taking a look at these greats. Lincoln, Roosevelt, JFK, and Obama. I'll be arguing that Barack Obama deserves a seat at the highest table. This year, we say goodbye to the world's first family. Whatever your political persuasion, I think most would agree that the Obamas have been a class act. President Obama has been unflappable in the face of provocation. Not a whiff of dodgy emails, videotapes or interns. And what other president has such a good sense of humour?
President Obama will go down as perhaps the worst president in the history of the United States! Exclamation point. At real Donald Trump. Well, at real Donald Trump, at least I will go down as a president.
That's just too good. And Michelle Obama is no shrinking violet, yet somehow she complimented her husband rather than competed with him. When will we ever again have a First Lady who can kick it with Missy Elliott and James Corden in carpool karaoke, while also relax with royalty and heads of state? When will we ever again have an American president who is respected and loved globally like a Kennedy, who has changed the political landscape of America like a Lincoln, and rescued a failing economy like an FDR? The Obamas have set the bar high, which is probably why the current candidates both seem like a trade down. I believe America is forever changed for the better because of them, and we bid them farewell with a heavy heart. So, I saw you two sniggering over there, Rachel Johnson and Nick Ferrari.
I shall bring my co-counsel in, I'm sure, in just a moment. But the case for the prosecution or the defence of sanity, if Barack Obama has been such a crash-hot president, how come Trump is, admittedly, not doing as well as he was, but Trump was doing so well until the sex tapes exploded in his face?
I think because actually there is a shift happening in America. The demographics of the country are changing, and there is a part of America that wants to hold on to the past. And I think Trump represented feelings of discontentment. I totally understand why that has happened. And I think that is changing.
You've just told us, June, this is Lincoln meets FDR meets JFK. What are they discontent about?
I think America has had many problems in terms of...
What do you mean had? It doesn't now?
It does, but let me finish. May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Then I'm bringing co-counsel
Yeah,
in.
then bring the co-counsel in. Has had many problems, particularly, obviously, where race is concerned. And there is there's a huge segment of the country that feels that things are changing in the way that they don't want them to.
Okay.
America is becoming far more progressive, and I think that once Hillary Clinton comes in, there will be a progressive agenda that will forever change that country.
Last couple of points before Rachel gets involved. Let me just put this to you. You quite rightly acknowledge there are surveys that say that, unfortunately, the US has never been divided over race as it is at this moment, and this is pretty poor for a black president. I wonder if you speak to Syrians and Iraqis whether they would agree that Obama's been so fantastic on the world stage. And lastly, for three, his first diktat was going to be that he closed Guantanamo Bay. As we speak, it's still open.
Well,
he's not been an utter failure, but what he has been is style over substance. He's not achieved a lot.
I completely disagree. Carry on, Rachel. Co-counsel.
Yeah, I think it's hard to have President Obama, up there alongside those titans, those Mount Rushmore towering figures, because much as I think he's a fantastic guy and a dude, and he can read out a tweet and make us laugh and drop the mic, I don't think his record matches those previous presidents. I mean, let's not go over everything. He's been strong on some things, you know, gays in the military, race relations. He's tried on gun control.
A failing economy. Let's look at what...
No, the national debt is now much higher than it was when he took office.
But let's look at employment. Let's look at the unemployment levels. Let's look at what he inherited. And before we even go into all of that, I think also, please, let's not forget the significance of the win. So can we have a look at this?
Sure.
Wow.
I mean, I was there.
This is Nick's point.
I was there, and I was covering that for LBC, and I remember walking away from that rally in the park in Chicago, and this very wise old journalist told me, and there were elderly black people weeping, just weeping, and this journalist said to me, you know, he's not going to do it deliberately, but the people he's going to let down first are these people because he just hasn't got enough power. He's not going to be able to deliver.
What more do you want from
hang
him?
on. Not having enough power is about the American constitutional system.
And
basically.
checks and balances,
it's not about him.
yeah.
I agree with you. I think he's a real class act.
I agree.
I think he's, particularly after...
Well, we agree with you too.
Yes,
but politically...
But politically, well, Obamacare was a significant change.
Huge.
Which has had a
20
big
million
impact.
people now with health insurance. What more do you want?
Yeah, but that was in the 2 years when he had Congress.
Yeah.
A Democratic Congress. It's very difficult to be president for 6 years when you've got the opponents against you. And actually...
And they have an agenda to go against everything.
She's gone too far, Greg.
But also, yes, she probably has.
She's gone too far.
That's
all I want to hear.
I'm saying history will be very kind, and I think that we're going to see a shift
but it'll be kind
in America.
To him it'll be kind to him partly because he was the first black president.
And because he's done a good job.
Well.
Yeah.
And he did the job well.
What more do you want?
And his wife is a bit of a star without being... unpleasant or trying to be. She just is.
Herself, yeah.
I mean, you sit and watch that speech she did last week, and you listen to his speeches, and you think, God, what's breakfast like at their?
I
know. they must, you know. Do they both sit there making profound statements to each other?
It's soaring oratory over the Frosties.
Over the marmalade.
June, I understand what you're saying, and I think there's parts of truth in it, but I do tend to side more with Nick and Rachel. And I think for me, one of the things with Obama is I used to sit and watch after yet another mass shooting. I used to see him with tears in his eyes and, you know, feel and talk passionately about getting a handle on these gun controls and stuff. And
which is near impossible in
I know,
America.
but I just think when he used to say those things, I used to believe him and I used to will it to be true. I used to see, like, yet another school of children being shot down, and he never really made that much of a dent.
No, but let's look at the auto industry.
You've been a classic tabloid journalist.
Have I?
You've over-egged it. He's been OK, but you've portrayed him as one of the greatest in the world. You've got to stop these tabloid
But what
skills.
I'm saying is, for modern politics, I think when we look back 20, 30 years from now, we are going to see a progressive shift in America, and Obama is going to be part of the start of that. For sure. I don't think the extreme right will ever be back in power again over there.
But you put him in with a bunch of other people. I mean, JFK, I suspect...
We had to romance it up a bit,
if you go back to JFK, if he hadn't been shot...
I agree.
You know, he would have continued in Vietnam. He would have become one of the most disliked presidents in history. All the civil rights legislation would not have gone through. It all went through because of Lyndon Johnson. So he was lucky. I mean, if you can call being shot lucky, but at least he died.
His legacy was it?
His legacy. I do think, though, I mean, I'm more on your side than their side. I think Obama is a class act.
Has done a stellar job.
I wonder, if Obama was white... would you still feel the same? Are you so inspired because he's the first black president?
I'm, for sure, definitely inspired because he's the first black president. Let's not forget the significance of that. Let's not forget the horrendous problems America has had where race is concerned. But if he were white, I would completely also be inspired by him.
Would you?
In the same way that I was so inspired by Bill Clinton, but as a man, he has many personal failings that a President Obama doesn't have. So I think I give credit where credit is due, but I'm also going to say it is totally significant that he is black, and you have a black family in the White House representing a positive image of black people in the way that you don't see enough in the press. So, of course, that matters.
So if he's white, would he have been on your Mount Rushmore?
Yes, because all the other men on my Mount Rushmore were white.
OK, so
what's your point?
he's still good enough. He's still good enough to get
Of course. Anyway,
he also had the great advantage, of course, of following George W. Bush, whose presentation
now looks good compared to Donald Trump.
Yes, I know. You never thought that would happen, did you? That actually, you're sitting here, you know, lamenting that he's no longer president because we might get Trump.
Exactly.
But, I mean, George W. Bush, style-wise, was hopeless, wasn't he?
Yes, he had.
But even you have to.
I mean, Kennedy had great style, but actually the real work was done by Lyndon Johnson, who didn't have style.
But isn't the reality if the Republicans...
OK, can I get both you and Rachel to agree on one thing?
What's it?
Which is, at least, come on, Obama is the coolest president we've ever had.
So in love with you. Obama out.
Well, if that's how you judge your presidents, that's extraordinary. I don't think I'd ever see Mrs. Thatcher or Angela Merkel doing things like that. Those are worldly...
She wasn't that athletic, was she?
He is the master of the photo opportunity, that's for sure.
And he's a good-looking dude, as you would say.
And articulate.
Listen, talking about great leaders of men and women, I want to bring you in, Greg. I've laid into you quite a lot recently over your previous role as FA chairman. So, in the interests of fairness, I'd like to acknowledge an FA success. This week, the first Park Life grassroots football hub was launched, which I know, Greg, was one of your ideas. And as well as the usual dignitaries, the Sports Minister, Tracy Crouch, was there. Yes, Crouchy. And took the opportunity to show off her skills.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Well, of course, Greg can do that in his sleep, but tell us how these hubs might put us back on the glory days one day.
She's quite good, actually.
She is, isn't she?
She's quite good.
Yeah.
She's a good sport. I think a good sports minister. She's also a qualified coach, so she knows about it.
And I watched the coverage yesterday. The FA were at pains to say this was your brainchild and your idea. When are we going to see the fruits? How will it work?
Basically, we're asking kids and adults to play on appalling facilities these days. Terrible pitches, too much rain. The local authorities not got the money to maintain them, so therefore the idea is that the FA puts a lot of money into building all-weather pitches.
Will she get more girls into footy?
That's the aim. There's a big campaign to get more girls into footy. Remember, you've always got to remember, the FA banned women's football for 50 years. You know, which tells you all about... tells you about the Blazers,
Anyway, we have come to the end of the show, everybody. That's it from us. For clips and vlogs, head to Facebook and Twitter, and highlights from the best debate of the week. I think, obviously, that's mine. Make sure you download our Sky News mobile app. We'll see you next week.